Good evening, everyone. My name is Lawrence Bolleton, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Evelyn R. Green Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee's Chicago Regional Office. And I'm originally from the South Florida area, Miami Beach area, where it is nice and warm right now, unlike where I am currently sitting in Chicago. I live in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago with my wife and with our beautiful little 5-year-old daughter who may make a surprised appearance at some point during this hour. So I apologize in advance. And with my role at AJC, I work to bring our global Jewish advocacy agenda and priorities here to the Chicagoland area. When I think about my favorite Chicago memory, there's so many to choose from, first of all. But when I think about the context of the conversation tonight, I think about a memory from January 6th of 2020, when AJC globally had a one-day campaign called, it was a social media campaign, #JewishAndProud. And this campaign came about because there had been, we had issued the results of a survey that showed that that American Jews were afraid to show their Jewishness out of their fear of safety. And this follows several different anti-Semitic attacks across the country. And in 2019, nearly every night during Hanukkah in the Brooklyn area of New York, we saw violent anti-Semitic attacks against visibly Jewish individuals. So this, we have a social media campaign, and in the Chicago regional office, we decided that we wanted to have our staff go in front of the Bean downtown and display signs that said Jewish and proud. And the Chicago Tribune got wind of this and wrote an article about it, which we were very grateful for. What ended up happening was that so many people wanted to come and join us in that picture. So we ended up having a much bigger event than we had anticipated. It really turned into an event where we had a couple hundred people downtown, and I had called the police to be there just God forbid in case, and had a couple hundred people there holding signs that said Jewish and proud. And at one point there was this chant that broke out, and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it because it was just such a surreal feeling to see so many people there, knowing the sad reality that it can be dangerous to be an identifiably Jewish individual in America today. But to see that pride come together was really something that I won't soon forget. So that's a memory that I think about. I will pass it over to Pastor Daniels.
Well, my name is George Daniels, the senior pastor of First Baptist Congregational Church, and my prime memory is Riverview, so I guess I'm telling my age. But one of the fellowship highlights of my life was we had Dr. Tony Evans from Texas come and do a all peace celebration. It was an ecumenical fellowship with, I suppose, about 15 churches from the city of Chicago, and that was so spiritual for me. And so I really enjoyed that. And I've been at the particular church where I am for about 40 some years. And so I've seen some changes, and I really try to be attuned to what's taking place. And I celebrate the relationship that Father Hurley and I, Old St. Pat, forged this past summer around some social agendas and racial healing and all of that. So I'm just looking forward to the discussion.
I'm happy to go next. My name is Janan Muhajir. I'm I would say, planted Chicagoan, so I wasn't born here. I was actually born, my parents are from India, so I was born in India, raised in the Middle East before I moved to, my parents moved to the suburbs of Chicago, and then I came to DePaul University for my undergraduate education, which now is a very long time ago. I look a lot younger than I am. And I think one of the things that's really important to me is that I got to know Chicago as a college student. And that was really sort of my introduction to the city. And obviously I still live here. I haven't left since. And part of the reason that I have become a Chicagoan is because of my initial opening into Chicago came as a freshman student at DePaul University, which is a Catholic university. The joke around Interfaith Youth Corps, where I serve as the senior director of leadership, is that I'm the Muslim girl who found Islam at a Catholic institution, because I didn't come from a very religious household. I came from a culturally Muslim household, but it was really in college where seeing DePaul's very Vincentian identity, where service and volunteerism was very much part of campus culture, and a lot of us who were not Catholic were also pulled into that campus culture, that I started to ask questions of myself. And so my favorite Chicago memory is really being sort of a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed freshman student in the late 90s at DePaul's campus, and spending several days in this service learning program as I started my college career as an undergraduate student, and really discovering the city, not the like glamorous, glitzy, touristy parts of the city, but the parts of the city that really make up the soul of who Chicago is, and learning about, what are the needs of neighborhoods, learning about what it means to be, what it means to give back, what it means to be involved. And that to me really sort of made up what Chicago is to me. So it's not a specific memory, but it's a range of experiences. I'm obviously someone who comes from a Muslim background. You can identify me by my headscarf. I also come from a multiracial family. So my parents are from India. My husband is half Palestinian, half Irish. My mother-in-law actually has hand-drawn a picture of Old St. Pat's, because she's an artist and has some love for her past heritage. She converted to Islam when she was a young person. So there's a lot of different ways that Chicago is very present to me, and I'm just grateful for the opportunity to be here and to be in conversation with all of you.
Thanks a lot, Janan. I'm Father Tom Hurley. I'm the pastor over at Old St. Patrick's in Chicago here in the West Loop. I have been here since 2003. I came as the associate to my predecessor, Father Jack Wall, who was really instrumental in building up this community here at Old St. Pat's. The building itself, the sanctuary, is the oldest Catholic sanctuary in the city. It dates back to 1856. We opened up the doors. The immigrant folks, Irish immigrants, opened it up for midnight mass, 1856. That was the first time that people ever gathered here. I became the pastor in 2007, and it has just been tremendous to see the growth and the expansion, not only of the West Loop, but I've just been I'm a native Chicagoan. I grew up on the southwest side in the Morgan Park neighborhood. And I think I grew up pretty sheltered, thinking that everybody was Irish and Catholic. And so it's really kind of been a beautiful experience being down here and being in the heart of the city, and really being a place that has become kind of the hub for so many of our Jewish Catholic couples that have found their way here. And so it's just been so refreshing and fun to become friends with, and to work with so many of our rabbi friends in the city. And then likewise, as George said, it's been a great blessing to have found his acquaintance, and to have started something this past summer in our procession that we had in honor of Black Lives. And the question, what's my favorite Chicago memory? I guess being a runner, my annual memory that I really enjoy is the Chicago Marathon that I've done several times. And but just to run throughout the great neighborhoods of Chicago has been a real blessing. But as I look back, I guess my favorite Chicago memory in light of this conversation was really the funeral experience of the late, great Cardinal Bernardine. And I think if there was one guy that really embodied the beauty of what interfaith and the ecumenical movement was all about, it was the late, great Joseph Cardinal Bernardine. And he, for me, is just an iconic figure. And I just remember being a young priest. I was just ordained, and then to be at his funeral and to see all the interfaith leaders of Chicago there, and many weeping, because he just embodied it so beautifully. And then to be a part of the procession from the cathedral out to Mount Carmel Cemetery, and the route, I remember riding in one of the cars, and just to see the outpouring of love for this man, because he embodied what Chicago and what the ecumenical interfaith experience was all about. And that just to me is a vivid memory that is tattooed in my mind forever and in my heart. And I just think he was the best at it. He really was. So I stand here with great fondness for Cardinal Bernardine and what that was about. So thank you.
Father Hurley, now that I know that you're a runner, when things get back to some sense of normal, I would love to do a run with you sometime.
All right.
So
All
we'll
right.
have to make that happen.
You're probably quick. You're probably too fast for me, though.
I wouldn't count on it. I do have an asthma inhaler that I have to bring with me everywhere.
All right.
It's such an honor to share the screen with all of you. I'm going to get us started with our first question, and I'll attempt to answer this one, and then I'll pass it on to anyone who also wants to chime in with this. And the first question is how do each of our faiths talk about healing and race? And as I was looking at this, I was really thinking about some text, some Jewish text, and there's no shortage of this type of this topic within Judaism. So I want to share a few that really speak to me and why, and then I'll pass it along to whomever else wants to chime in. The first one that I want to share is one that says, "Justice, justice you shall pursue, that you may thrive and occupy the land that Adonai your God is giving you." And I think about this from the sense of what we need to do as individuals, and that it doesn't necessarily just come to us, and that we have to continuously search for justice for ourselves, for each other, to be cognizant of the challenges and the struggles that others are experiencing. The second one that really speaks to me is, if I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? And for me, it's a good reminder that we can't just be for ourselves. We have to constantly be looking for ways to improve other communities, just as we hope that other communities would do for us. And I feel so privileged to be able to work for an organization like AJC that really prioritizes that. And while certainly one of our priorities will always be to combat anti-Semitism, we know that the presence of anti-Semitism is a society problem because it's indicative of other issues that are in communities today. A couple others, and then I'll turn it over, or one more specifically. Anyone who sees a person oppressing an orphan or widow and does not come to their aid, they will also be considered oppressors. And this, to me, reminds me of just the whole idea of allyship. And what does it mean to be an active bystander and being aware of what's happening, even when it may not be convenient for us? When I think about healing and I think about race, there's always an element that we have to get uncomfortable with. And in order for us to be, I think, authentic to ourselves and authentic to others, we have to be comfortable being uncomfortable sometimes. So those are a few that really jump out to me, but happy to pass it on to anyone who wants to jump in next.
Well, I'll jump in. Well, I think the platform that we often spring from in terms of social healing and reaching out and building bridges and building economic relationships from the passage of Scripture where the Lord says, love one another as I love you. And we certainly have tried to typify and exercise that particular principle of passage of Scripture in the church where I serve. We have reached out in Africa, Ghana specifically. We built 6 classrooms over there, 4 in 09 and 2 in 10. We supported 2 orphanages, one in Osu, and then one is Countryside, which is private. We supported a clinic in Femina, and we've been doing that, and we continue to support the orphanage. We adopted a family over there where we sent them quarterly money. We went to Haiti after the earthquake and built 4 houses down there. And so we have to reach out, and it's just showing that you care. And we've made multiple trips in the United States when we had national disasters. We were to Enterprise, Alabama. When President Bush was president, had a tornado down there. We were in Huntsville when they had a devastating tornado. We went to Katrina, went to Louisiana, New Orleans, and ministered to the people there. a couple of years ago when they had the disaster in Texas. We went to Houston, took a delegation. And so we just have to show love. I think sometimes we feel that that's somebody else's responsibility. But our faith demands that we get personally involved. In my other passage of scripture, I mean, take up too much time, it's Romans 12. Because that passage of scripture, it tells us that we have to present ourselves to God. Then it let us know that we have what we need when he dispenses the gifts to us. And then after dispensation of the gift, we have to use what we have. And then that part of that chapter tell us you got to live it out. God is not impressed with dissertations and writing, but he in touch with a sensitive heart. And so we have to do that. And so we've been involved in the city of Chicago in terms of street ministry campaign against gun violence since the 80s. And so you must get involved. It calls for investment. And you can't invest in the community by writing the editorial. You have to get involved. And so I try to foster that spirit in the congregation where I've served, because the congregation where I served was built in 1869, and it evolved out of social protests from Fourth Press, where they put out 48 members of the congregation because they didn't want to participate in slavery. And so they built a church in 1851, and what is now, it was St. Anne's and Randolph, but it's Halsted and Randolph now. And so that church burned. So in 1869, they built the church there in Union Park. And that congregation certainly helped facilitate, prior to its being there in 1851, transporting slaves from the South.
Beautiful. I guess maybe from a faith perspective, we talk about healing, at least from a Catholic Christian perspective, I think for us, or at least for George and myself, right, from the Christian perspective, I mean, one of the things we always say is Jesus was he was a border walker, and he was always crossing the borders of his own time and reaching out. And Jesus of the Gospels was one that, was always not only reaching out to those in need, but also to those of other, those who weren't like him. And so I think we've got a great example from our own tradition in terms of how we're called to cross the borders and how we're called to reach out to those who are different from us, and to, it was always about inclusion. Jesus was always about inclusion. So I think we have at least answering the question in that way, that to me just seems to speak to our reality.
Thank you for that. I also, in listening to you all, I had picked out a couple of verses and a couple of hadith. Hadith is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, to share. And now I find myself compelled to share different ones based on some of the wisdoms that you all have shared in the last few minutes of our conversation. One verse that I specifically cling to, and it actually in the Quran, it's in the chapter called Women, which I think is really important. It says, be witnesses for justice, even if it's against yourselves, your family, and your community. And that to me is really a call to speak to what needs to be healed first. It's a call to first address the issues at hand, the issues of our day. And then there's a different verse that talks about, if you have saved one life, it is as if you have saved all of humanity. So if your work is impacting even one person, then that is enough. That is as if you've saved all of humanity. And to kind of continue with that theme, what I'm often thinking about, specifically when thinking about racial justice and racial equity, is these dual compelling reasons of mercy and forgiveness, along with justice and truth telling. And I think those have to be balanced in the way that faith communities sort of make a call, specifically in the time that we're living in, where there is a lot of polarization and division, and there's a lot of alternative truth telling in terms of what is actually happening. And so it's important to both hold on to, how do we address the issues of the hand? How do we feel a responsibility and a duty as communities of faith to come to that? And also, how do we then bring people along and do the kind of healing that needs to happen? So for me, those two things can't be separated from one another. They have to happen together in some way and simultaneously. Following sort of that train of thought, the next question that I would love to kind of throw out to all of you is, how have you tried to advance racial equity in your own faith communities? For me, I think this is a really important question, simply because I think there are lots of competing intersectional issues that we are dealing with as a national community, and so to some level as a global community, racism being one of the most important ones. And alongside racism, there are issues of patriarchy, there are issues of gender-based violence. Like, all of those things for me are really interconnected to one another. And one of the ways that I have been thinking a lot about racial equity, specifically in the last year, but also, I would say more since I have become a mother, is really about how do we recognize and name the diversity in our community, in the Muslim community, and how do we then tell a narrative that is true to who we are. And oftentimes what that means to the Muslim community is that the way that the conversation is imposed on us through Islamophobia and other anti-Muslim ways is to define us as one community, right? The Muslim community, and to define us often as foreigners. So as an immigrant community that comes from abroad, when the reality of Muslim communities in America is that about 30% of American Muslims are Black Muslims. They are Muslims who have ancestry to enslaved peoples who were brought here. They are Muslims who are rich in their own cultural heritage that is very different from my family's experience as an immigrant Muslim. So I like to think of Muslims as actually people of various communities who are connected through a faith practice, but really are rich and diverse. And that narrative of othering Muslims as foreigners is a very interesting tactic that is used, that is actually born of white supremacy. It comes from that language to other someone, and to also not recognize the holistic nature and the diverse nature of a community. So for me, it's really about, as Muslims, we have to look internally to our conversations, to our intra-faith conversations, and to be real about the racism that exists within our community, as well as we also look out externally and talk about what's happening in our national context at large. And both of those things need to happen simultaneously in order for us to really be authentic about what racial equity means for us. So I'll stop there and I'll pass it on to you all.
I'll jump in. In order to reach out for racial healing, we have to look through different sets of lens. We are so comfortable looking through the lens of culture, the lens of privilege, until it kind of handicap us. And so we have to put on a different set of lens. We have to put on the lens of faith. And our faith demands that we love, that theme keep resonate with me. And so in order to break down a barrier, you really have to get to know a person. You may be on a job for 10 to 15 years, speak to a person and just hi, work in the same department. But unless you get some quality time with that person, it don't have to be anything specific. What is your vacation site? Where are your family? Where are you going? What are your plans? And then you begin to understand the person. Let's tell the truth. Everybody, when they see somebody, they have a preconceived notion about the character of that person. Don't know anything about them. It is more than likely based on a biased opinion. And so, you said, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know you felt that way, because there's some things in your life, in your heart, that you share with racial healing that you didn't think they even cared about. And so, first of all, you have to get to know a person. And so that was one of the impetus behind Old St. Pat and First Baptist this summer, coming together with brothers from that congregation, brothers of First Baptist. And it was amazing how we fellowship after we got to know each other. And so it gives us, we have to, it's almost like a self-examination of yourself. If the truth be told, we all hold some level of biases. We just biased by creature. We're biased by nature. And so when we appreciate and value others, that's the real problem. We have pre-conclude and peg people and put them in the holes and pegs and say, you stay there. And that's the role I assign you. And racial healing and reconciliation can never take place when we peg people, put them in a hole and say, you stay there. And I tell you when you can move. Because that's not the way the human design, human construct is. We're in this fellowship together. We're in this word together. We're in this experience together. And we have to, as Tom said, cross the border. Don't just stay in your little parochial yard. Just expand. Because that's one of the things that our Christian faith teach us, that we have to go out. A very powerful piece in the book of Acts, when it says, and you shall receive power if the Holy Ghost come upon you. You should be my witnesses, both in Judea, Samaria, and uttermost parts of the world. And so we are not localized. And so, but it has to first start at home before we go to the world. If I'm not in fellowship with my neighbors, what would give me the impetus or interest even to go somewhere else? And so we can't always, things are bad. And you know things are bad in Chicago, gun violence, other stuff. But if I never do anything but criticize this, Lord, I don't know what we're coming through, but what have I done to help reconcile this situation? What have I done to add some help to it? And so I think when we get there, and people, once we value a person and we try to break that ice and begin to have a dialogue, then we see the value of each person, authenticity of each person, and the interest of a person. And so that is key. We can't stand at a distance and say, well, let's have a prayer breakfast and it will go away. No, we have to be upfront, rubbing shoulders, in the dish together, working for each other.
Pastor Daniels, you took some of the words right out of my mouth.
I did.
You did. I'll get to some of those again in a second too. But in the Torah, Jews are taught to accept others without prejudice or bias. And when I think about that, I think about unconscious bias, and I think about the way that we really need to look internally in order to be able to do this work. And it makes me think about when I'm in a social setting or any setting for that matter, and someone makes a joke. Am I willing to confront that person? Am I willing to have that deep conversation at that moment? Am I willing to go back and have that deep conversation later? Am I willing to lose a friend over it? We have to really think about the way that our unconscious bias works and how we're willing to interject into conversations with people that say things that maybe they don't understand the level of hurt that they cause. And so often, and I see this all the time, that people they say, oh, well, that's just so-and-so. They don't mean it. And they may not mean it. But if we're not willing to stand up and say, you know what, that hurts, and let me tell you why that hurts, then that individual may not ever learn. So I think about that when I think about what Jews are taught as relates to accepting others without prejudice or bias. And that's not unique to the Jewish community. There's a specific text that I want to read. You shall not hate your kinsfolk in your heart. Reprove your kinsman, but incur no guilt because of him. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your countrymen. And this part is the part that really sticks with me. Love your fellow as yourself. Love your fellow as yourself. And Pastor Daniels, you mentioned love earlier. And I really just think about how beautiful of a world would it be if everyone believed that and practiced that. Love your fellow as yourself. That's not easy to do. It's not easy to do when there are things that people say that anger us, or there are things that people do that anger us, or there's things that people don't do or don't say that anger us. If we can come to this work from the lens of love, I think it makes a big difference. Rabbi Sheila Peltz Weinberg said this, and I want to read it. It talks about empathy. And I think about this work, and I also think about empathy. And she asks the question, how do we learn empathy? By being encouraged to notice it, that it actually feels better to be open-hearted, connected, and loving than it feels to be isolated and cut off. She goes on to say, we cultivate good habits by repetition and encouragement, but also by recognizing that they actually make us happier, and we all want to be happy. So there's a few things I think about when I hear that. When I think about we cultivate good habits by repetition and encouragement, I think of this simple book that I read a long time ago by Ken Blanchard called Whale Done, whale like the animal, W-H-A-L-E. And it talks about a trainer going into the water with a whale and training this whale to do whatever he's asking the whale to do. And the question was, when the whale doesn't do what you want it to do, you don't yell at it. You encourage behavior that you want to see more of. It's not to say you ignore the behavior you don't want to see. And this example just reminds me of that. But what it also really reminds me of is what happens if the type of work that needs to be done makes us miserable? Or should we prioritize finding an opportunity that we enjoy, or do we focus on those that are most urgent? And this work is not always going to be glitter and sunshine. There may be times when we feel like, oh, I have to wake up and do this again. But it's the way that we frame it. We need to frame it as not, oh, I have to wake up and do this again. It's, I get to wake up and I get to do this again. And I get to be in conversation like with all of you tonight. And I get to be able to do this work every day. And for me, it's getting to do the work that needs to be done and what others tell me that I need to do, because I do not have all of the answers. I don't have all the answers for my own community, let alone all the other many communities that we strive to work with. And it's about listening. It's about learning. And that really, for me this summer, I learned a lot because I did more listening. I think that so many of us are tempted to want to try to solve the problem without actually taking the time to learn what the problem is in the first place. And I absolutely have been guilty of that. So I really just think about listening. I think about learning, and I think about what we can accomplish when we come to this from a standpoint of love, and when we come to this work from the standpoint of feeling truly blessed that we get to do this and we get to get out of bed and do this. And that to me, I think really frames it.
When I think about this too, and all of you have just really been so inspirational, and Lawrence, just what you were saying too, I think about relationships, and several years ago we had a great guy who came here. Maybe you've heard of him, Father Greg Boyle, and Greg is out in Los Angeles, and he works with some of the toughest gangs in America, and he's just committed his whole life to it. And he started a thing called Homeboy and Homegirl Industries, and it basically, he's just become very, very inspirational. I don't want to talk all about Greg Boyle, but we had him come here, and he just, he had written a book called Tattoos on the Heart, and just talked about just the beautiful relationships that he has built with, and really trying to help folks kind of transition out of gang life to really feeling good about themselves and really getting in touch with their truest identity. But he came here and he really challenged our community. We had a packed church one night a few years ago, and he said, I'm not quite sure why you invited me to be here. And he said, if you just are listening, you want to hear some more stories, or you're just here to hear a good talk, then this is a waste of time. He said, what we need to be about is kinship. And that was the word, kinship. And he really challenged us in such a way that we kind of looked around here at Old St. Pat's and said, we do a lot of things that are nice things, but do we ever build up relationships? And, we live in this city that is a wonderful city, but still is so segregated. And have we ever thought about, entering into kinship with another community, and not just another Catholic community in some poor neighborhood, but rather a neighborhood itself. And one place that is not far away is North Lawndale. And so we started building this relationship, and it wasn't about a bunch of white people parachuting in, to a neighborhood saying, well, how can we, what can we do here? But we said, no. It's not about that. It's about building relationship. And so we brought somebody on full time on our staff he's the director of our kinship initiative, and Vince Geider, and he's just done a beautiful job. And it's been attending services. It's been us going there and them coming here. And so it's not doing things. It's not another project of some nice thing to do, but rather it's how do we continue to build relationships? And really, in many ways, it's what inspired us to build this relationship with George and First Baptist Congregational. And again, all of that was in response to what happened with George Floyd. And our thing was, we've got to build relationships. And, we talk about how we're going to break down the sin of racism. It's all that divides us. So what will bring us together? Anyhow, that's what we've committed ourselves to, being bridge builders, and how we continue to build relationships with people in our city right here, right under our own nose,
Pastor Daniels, do you want to take us to our next question?
Okay. Well, the next question is, what is the root cause of violence in the city of Chicago? That is I used to say $100,000 question in years past. It's a very complex issue. There's no single answer because it's a multifaceted, complex monster. Let me just try to address a few of the things that I think will contribute to this. First of all, whether we want to admit it or not, but there's a lack of parenting with children. In the 50s and 60s, we primarily had a nuclear family. But today in America, we know that many of the households are headed by women, and thank God for mothers. But there's a lack of manhood in the house. And only a man could teach a boy how to be a man. A mother could tell him how and show him the principles, but a living example is more demonstrative. And so we have that lack of continuity in terms of. Next is a lack of spiritual formation. We're spiritual beings by nature, whether we want to admit it or not. And to understand the concept of creation, God designed us, and he designed us to love him and to love others. But the church, it could be any faith. I'm not promoting a particular denomination of faith, but there have to be some biblical principles. You have to have a moral compass. And if you have a moral compass, you're subject to vacillate or moving in a direction without any encouragement. And so one of the things that perhaps been on the American scene was J. Edgar Hoover. And J. Edgar Hoover once said, "I seldom have I seen a child brought up in Sunday school come to the court." So the church, the Christian faith community, has an influence on the development and the structure and focus of a child. One thing that handicaps America is school dropout. Yes, school dropout. And so once you drop out of school, you lessen your possibility to be a contributing citizen. You lessen your possibility to be able to maintain yourself, your needs, and your well-being. And so there may be a number of reasons. Whether I think we can admit this. Since the 70s, the introduction of the hippie movement, they had not held them hostage for this. But when drugs came on the scene, a lot of people became victimized by it. And as a result of that, we discovered that people, they almost sold their soul. And so just last year, we had so many people taking drugs, they had to get this antidote for it. And so some of the problem is that grandparents are raising children. Yeah. So the parents is conspicuous absent from the home. And so that's a struggle. And so if you drop out, what skill do you have? There is no such category anymore as I can do nothing. You have to have a specific skill to do a particular job. And so because of that, there's a lack of jobs for those persons who fall in those categories. And so I feel that society have to do a little more. Everybody have to hold some responsibility for what they do or don't do. That's a given reality. But if there were more internet accessibility, I was speaking with a gentleman from the NAACP, Carl Ellis, who was talking to one of the internet companies, talking about putting a tower at Pulaski and Madison that serve a certain area. And so even we challenged now with our children in school, many don't have internet capacity. And so some of them can't even afford a computer. And so that shouldn't be. And so those things just contributed to this kind of violence. Many residents live in areas where the community is hostile. I mean, there is gang infested. And so we may not know it or not, but we've been working we worked with Henry Horner back in 1985. And so just this past summer, we had a meeting over there. And it's a given that you can't even cross a certain street because it was a boys club. And I said, why don't the people go down there? Oh, no, you can't cross that. You can't do that. And see, we don't see that, but people live with that hell every day, every night. And if the truth be told, some of our children become gang members just to survive. You know, they be going to school, coming to school. They can go out at night. So they have to identify with a negative element just to survive. And so that promotes, that breeds more violence. And so we have to do something to mitigate that. We have to do something to kind of bring that to closure because it's not going to get any better. So there is not one single approach, but there are multiple approaches that we have to begin to invest in. Now, I really have a problem. I have a problem that we would be willing to pay 2 to 3 times as much to house a prisoner as we would do to fund education for a child. Yeah, there are some preventative steps that we can take, but we live in a republic that's desensitized to the needs of people. It's criminal for a judge to buy stock in the penal system. They should be locked up. Can you imagine that? A sitting judge on a bench going to buy stock in the penal system? Because if a person appear before them, if I give them a short-term sentence and my dividend is less, if I give them long-term sentence, I get more money coming to me. We are just so far apart. We have dehumanized people. We have devalued people. And so this thing just didn't happen overnight. It evolved. And if we're not careful, this monster is going to get bigger and bigger. And so we have to come together as a community. We have to value people. We have to let people know that we care. We have to show them the way. Some people don't know, they don't know the way. And so as people of community, we have to show this is the step you take, this is the direction you go in. Because as my brother was saying earlier about the whale, you don't beat him over the head because he will drown you, but you gently give encouragement. And so we live in a community that has been abandoned in many ways. And sometimes when the community is blighted with crime and stuff, people write it off. They just write it off. You cannot erase feelings. You can't erase devastation. You can't erase that. But we discover ourselves in America, we do that. So all lives matter. And it mattered before George Floyd. But we have so low evaluation of life. And so that's why these problems keep multiplying. And so by building more jails won't solve it. Having more beatings won't solve it. We have to get to know one another. We have to go out into the community. We have to invest in the community. We have to let people know that we care. And then only can we see some movement, see some reconciliation, and say, you really do care. And I thank you for caring. So this is an all day and all night conversation for me. So I'll just break off here.
Thank you for that. And I think as you were speaking, I was actually reminded of a quote from Malcolm X, who said, you can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace if they don't have their freedom. And to me, like that's essentially what we're dealing with in some ways as it relates to violence, because it's really a byproduct of a lot of different things, different realities of systemic racism, of economic oppression, of environmental oppression. All of those things are sort of building as a system to disadvantage communities who then have other ways of surviving. And that really, before we address how to talk about the violence, we also have to talk about the systemic things that are leading them there. And I think you obviously spoke to that very beautifully. So thank you for sharing that. I don't think I have much more to contribute to that question.
I'll be so brief on this because I agree there's very little I can add to what Pastor Daniel so beautifully articulated. I would just say that part of this too is I think we give up on people too quickly. And we need to be able to take more time to help and be willing to extend a hand and be more aware of the challenges people are facing. But there's nothing else I could add on that to what Pastor Daniel said.
I would, I guess, second the motion or triple the motion here. I think George really articulated it so beautiful. And I just come back to, again, what it just comes back to relationships and kinship. And when there's no kinship or relationships and we're not doing this together, then, and when we don't care about one another in communities, we only care about ourselves, then, obviously that's where the troubles will continue. So, but again, I agree. I can't add more to what George beautifully said already. Going on to our next question, just mindful of time too, is, what is one message from your faith that you think can add healing to Chicago? So what's one message from your faith that you think can add healing to Chicago? I guess, from our tradition, I continue to look to this Pope who has done some really good things. And it's so fun to hear some of my Jewish and Muslim sisters and brothers keep saying, we like our Pope, where they have taken ownership of this man, Francis. And I think about a couple years ago, and he really dedicated the whole year to mercy. And he just kept talking about mercy. And it really was helpful that he dedicated a year and he called it the Year of Mercy. And when I think about that, I just think about mercy. And it's not about mercy necessarily just in terms of forgiveness, but it's mercy in terms of how do we live for one another, and how do we extend our hands and our hearts for one another. And again, from our tradition, Jesus was always about mercy. He was always about inclusion. He was always about second chances. And how do we give each other a second chance? How do we continue to extend mercy and possibility and inclusion to others? And so, anyhow, I guess I would hold up the great example of Francis. And what was his line when he first started about how we need to be field hospitals for the poor, and just a great line. And the other line that he said is that you should have the smell of the sheep on you. If you're going to be ministers, no matter what tradition, we should have the smell of the sheep, that we need to be walking with each other. And so anyhow, I just offer that from Pope Francis.
I think for me, I think about a Jewish prayer, and I'll tell you, my grandma Sylvia, of blessed memory, would be so proud of all the text I'm reciting tonight to everyone. But I think this really captures it for me. It says, "And God saw everything that he had made and found it very good. And he said, 'This is a beautiful world that I have given you. Take good care of it. Do not ruin it.' It is said before the world was created, the Holy One kept creating worlds and destroying them. Finally, he created this one and was satisfied. He said to Adam, 'This is the last world I shall make. I place it in your hands. Hold it in trust.'" And that I get goosebumps again reading that, because we have this huge and unbelievable obligation to take care of one another in all of our faiths. And it's not just a Jewish thing. It's an all people thing. We have to be there to take care of one another. And we shouldn't view it as an option either. It's a mandate that sometimes we forget when things aren't convenient for us. So I want to leave that there, and excited to hear from my other friends here.
Thank you for that. It reminds me of another hadith that said, if the end of times is upon you and you have a sapling in your hand, go ahead and plant it, which is to say, even if you're confronted with the absolute, the absoluteness of the end of days, like you still have a responsibility to still continue the work and continue to build and plant that tree and hope that, whatever effort you put in, that there's some fruit that will bear. And I think to me, that's really sort of the fundamental way of thinking about continuing a conversation around healing, is to say that no matter how awful and hopeless the situation feels, like we continue the work, we continue to build, we continue to invest in relationships. And that is really sort of the crux of how I tap into some of the Muslimness for me in this conversation. But yeah.
Well, I think love is the centerpiece. It's the platform. It goes full circle. And we have to go into the lab of love to address, recognize, to challenge, to help fix what is wrong in our community. And first, we know it's in our hearts, because so is the heart thinks, so does the behavior. Your hand isn't jump up and hit somebody. No, it has a directive. And so we need a pure heart. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, he said, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And so we don't have to create a model to bring about kinship. We don't have to create a model about how to foster love. We don't have to create a model about how we're to get together, because we heard it articulate in very specific ways from the Jewish community, from the Muslim community, and from the Christian community. It's out there. We just have to use it. I mean, it's self-application. No matter how much you know or how much you have, unless you do it, it doesn't matter. If someone have a pilot license, he said, I went to pilot school to train to fly. And if he or she never flies, so what? I was just remembering this past Sunday. I had an uncle who lived in Florida. He had an Alabama driving license. I grew up in Alabama, by the way. He had an Alabama driving license, and he had a Florida driving license. I never saw him drive a car or truck. He didn't have it. For his personal, I guess, glory. And so we have answers, brothers and sisters. We have the answers. And we have to encourage one another in the circle. One of the images that I often have from the civil rights movement, they always end in prayer, we shall overcome. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't somebody standing up there, but they were locked. It was close, hand in hand. And so we have to achieve the things that face us. God has helped us to do it. And so we just have to be locked in arm in arm with the same common interests, to love each other, to protect each other, to equip each other, to empower each other, and to serve each other. And we will have a better world. But we know this has to be done in incremental phases. Everywhere you go, have to have a starting point. If you're going to Beijing, going to Argentina, you just don't jump up and go. And so we have to have a starting point. And so the challenge for our community in which we live, we have to be willing to come to that starting point together and say, this is our destination. This is what we want to achieve. So are you willing to work with me? I will work with you. And then, brothers and sisters, we will get there.
Thank you for those powerful words. As we're winding down the hour, I feel like we could all talk all night. But we've got about 4 minutes left. So the last question for everyone, it should be a short answer. What song is your anthem for Chicago? What song is your anthem for Chicago? And I'm still thinking, so I'm going to let everyone else go, and then I will answer that last.
Well, George stole mine. I'm really upset with you, George, because that was the one I was going to use, was the spiritual "We Shall Overcome." And I found myself humming that yesterday, and particularly the verse, we'll walk hand in hand. And I just, I was just filled with so much hope and possibility. That was the word that Biden used often yesterday, was possibility. And he said one word I would think of when I think about America, I think about possibility. I also think about that for Chicago. And but I don't know, I found myself yesterday just walking around the house humming that song, We Shall Overcome and We'll Walk Hand in Hand someday. And I hope that day is real soon. So despite the fact that George teed it up for me, I'm going to steal that. And that was my anthem.
Well, that's one of my favorite anthems also. But I like the song, This Little Light of Mine. I'm going to let and in my home, in the church, to me, I'm going to let it shine. So we have to let our light, our resources, our potential, our love, our compassion, we have to let it be demonstrated. We have to let it be reflected throughout the life and the breadth of culture.
I'll take your lead and follow the same thematic elements. As I was thinking about this question, I couldn't think of a song in particular, but what I did think of was actually a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks, which so full disclosure, I live on the south side. I live in Kenwood, and there's a park near my house called the Gwendolyn Brooks Park, which has become sort of our sanctuary in this pandemic, because there's a little field with a little bust of the poet, and her poems are sort of on stone in the grass. So this is a poem that I've seen there over the last few months that has really given me some respite in thinking about where we are. True, there is silver under the veils of darkness, but few care to dig in the night for the possible treasure of stars. And I think that's indicative of the conversation we're having today. So I'm really grateful for this time.
I love it. I still don't have one. Maybe we're still writing it. We may still be writing it. And I think that we all contributed to that song tonight. And that's a beautiful thing. And I look forward to seeing what the next few verses look like over time. And hopefully I get to co-author that with all of you and with so many other wonderful people in our community. So fun to be able to be in dialogue with you tonight. And we have about a minute left. So I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful host to close us out.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. This was a great conversation. Thank you all, faith leaders, for sharing your wisdom with us. Join us next Wednesday as we hear from some of Chicago's storytellers in part 4 of the Candid Conversation series. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you, everybody.
Good night.
Good to meet all of you.